Hi everyone, it's Miss Mayoza, and we are going to review everything that we've learned so far this week. I know it's going a little bit quick, but it's okay. You can always pause, rewind, rewatch it again if you need to. So, the first thing we did this week was learn about the three colonial regions. First, we learned about the New England region. That has Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Geography affected everything. So while normally we would just think, oh yeah, the scenery is so nice, this actually affected their economy in a huge way. So instead of farming, they had to rely on fishing and whaling. They also used the forests. They took that natural resource and turned it all into lumber and relied on shipbuilding and selling that lumber to England. Then we have the middle or mid-Atlantic region. This area has New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. This area is also on the East Coast. As you can see right down here in the left, um, they also have many rivers. Many of them allow boats. They also had mild winters and warm summers, which is great for growing crops and keeping that arable land healthy. So this allowed them to rely on fishing, raising livestock, and farming wheat and corn. This is why this area was known as the breadbasket of the colonies at the time. Next, we have the southern region. We have those hilly plains. They're great for farming. We have fertile soil, a warm climate, and we have tons of rivers and harbors. The rivers and harbors allowed people to travel easily, and the great farmland was the perfect thing for places like Jamestown to start selling those cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. The colonies in this region, there were 5 of them, not 4. Those were Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So on Tuesday and Wednesday, we learned about Jamestown. We learned that Jamestown started with the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company is a joint stock company. Remember, that means that this company had investors give them money, and then those investors are going to expect at least a portion of those profits to come back to them. This was an easy way for some of these people to risk a little bit of money, not a ton, and still possibly come out super rich at the end of this. They landed in the Chesapeake Bay area in Virginia. This just happened to be right in the middle of some Powhatan hunting territory, and it was in a swampy, marshy area that was not great for farming and had very little fresh water for them to take advantage of. Whenever it came to someone being in charge, they did have a governor, Governor Yardley. However, that's not the most important part. The most important part is the governing body that they created once they were here in North America. They created the first English democratically elected governing body. And that's just a really fancy way of saying this is the first time that English people voted for someone while in the Americas. So they called this governing body the Virginia House of Burgesses. Burgesses was just a really fancy word for representatives at the time. So think about how we now have our own House of Representatives. They had their House of Burgesses. It was not all smooth sailing for Jamestown, however. They had many struggles to deal with. First of all, like I said previously, there was very little fresh water, and they had very little quality farming land. This meant that most of their crops ended up failing, some of them due to flooding. It was just very difficult to get a hardy set of crops going. They also had very little experience with building or farming, so it was very difficult to create those structures that would make survival easy. They also caught diseases from their food, from their poor hygiene, and their environment. Anytime a group of people are in a brand new environment, sometimes there are germs and diseases that their bodies aren't accustomed to, and it puts them at even more risk. They also kind of burned some bridges with a local Native American tribe. Remember, those Powhatans had been helping them at the very beginning. And then, whenever the Native Americans realized that they were not going to start farming and helping themselves, they backed off and kind of just decided to take care of themselves for once. So the colonists ended up stealing from them, and this led the Powhatans to retaliate. Right, it was right in the middle of a drought and right before a really tough winter. The Powhatans barricaded the entrances and exits to Jamestown. They did not allow colonists to leave, and this led to the starving time being an even more difficult situation and led just about 60 of the colonists to survive this. So there are a couple of things that helped them. Number one, Pocahontas. So not the movie version, but Pocahontas was a Powhatan girl who did end up marrying a Jamestown settler named John Rolfe. Also, second thing that helped them survive, John Rolfe introduced this new strain of tobacco, and this tobacco was extremely popular in England. They loved this new type, and they were able to pay Jamestown tons of money just to get more and more and more of that tobacco. All right, Thursday, we talked about the Plymouth Colony. So there were two groups involved in this. The Pilgrims, who everybody seems to have heard of, they were separatists. They were not happy with the way that religion was going in England. They did not believe in the changes in the Church of England, and they wanted to separate. That's why they're called separatists. They wanted to separate and start their own place in America where they knew that they would not be bothered and nobody would persecute them for their beliefs. However, they were also on the ship with a different group that they called the Strangers. These strangers were mostly adventurers. Many of them were coming to America to find new treasure. They were coming to just build themselves a new life. They had heard about all of these natural resources that were basically ripe for the picking here in America, so they wanted to see if they could survive and see if they could make a little money on the side. So these two groups did not always get along. So they decided to create something called the Mayflower Compact. This was a document. This basically outlined, it was kind of how they all agreed that nobody should make all of these decisions by themselves. We should have meetings. We should talk about our issues. We should solve our problems together. We should elect leaders, and we should get to vote on laws. So this was the first written plan for democratic government in colonial America. They did not do this alone. So Squanto was the main Native American that we give a lot of credit for helping the Pilgrims survive. Squanto introduced them to many other Native American leaders, especially the Wampanoag people. He introduced them to other leaders. He also helped interpret because he knew English and he knew several different languages that other Native American tribes were using. So he was able to help them communicate and set up trade deals. And he even taught them how to grow their own food in this new area. Last but not least is the Massachusetts Bay Colony. That's what you just read about today. Basically started by the Puritans. This is a group of people who wanted to purify the religion from England, and they had been heavily persecuted in England. They knew that they could not continue worshiping the way that they wanted in England, so they decided to leave, and they were given permission. Um, Massachusetts Bay Colony is the joint stock company that helped them. They ended up funding this trip with all of their investors, a lot like the Virginia Company. But this group of Puritans came to America and they needed a new way to govern that they knew would not risk their religion. So they created a theocracy. So, a theocracy is a government that is run by religious leaders with religious laws. So, one way that they make their decisions is to have town meetings. The meeting house was a place where they did a lot of things. They had their church, they had a courthouse, a lot of official business happened there, including whenever they would allow men to vote on their laws. This helped create a form of democracy. So, we will learn more about the Massachusetts Bay Colony next week, and we'll talk about how the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Plymouth Colony combined together eventually to create Massachusetts. So, coming up next week we have the Salem witch trials. That's more about the Massachusetts Bay Colony. We're going to learn about those rebels that started Connecticut and Rhode Island. We're also going to talk about the most organized colony ever. Totally would have won that award. That's Pennsylvania. And we're going to talk about Georgia debtors, and basically it was used as a buffer colony. So it's going to be really exciting. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Please email me if you have any questions. And don't forget, go right back to Kidem and finish answering those questions there. Thanks, y'all. Have a great weekend.